Hey friends, my name's Timothy, and I am a professional dungeon master running over 300 games a year. Today I'm here to answer a Monday Musing question from Matt Laser, who asks, what's your approach to maps for in-person play, especially in regards the larger dungeon and running dungeon crawls? So, Matt, this is a reasonably large topic, so I hope that I'm able to break it down in a way that's going to make sense for you. I have run every kind of map that you can possibly imagine, from scratching things down on paper, scouring my way with a sharp blade through a whiteboard, all the way up to 3D printing set-piece battles, including all of the works, homemade miniatures and all. When it comes to maps, I have a couple of tips that I think apply whether or not you're into in-person play or you're into online play, and that have really helped me over the years. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about what kinds of maps are best individually, what my experience has been, and what I think would be pretty much best for everybody to use on their in-person games. So, when it comes to running dungeons, then the biggest problem that we run into when it comes to maps is that we become slaves where we try to always use a map, and really we need to be trying to help our players stretch their willingness to imagine things a little bit better. Not only does the fog of war really exist in people's actual brain spaces to where it doesn't make a ton of sense for this top-down view that separates us from our character's perspective and takes attention away from what's really going on if you're looking through your character's eyes, but on top of that, it just makes your life harder. Keeping track of every single 5-foot square of the grid just means that you have one more thing that you have to do. When you're switching from one thing to another, working around a corner, if you realize 30 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, next week or next month later that you made a slight mistake, suddenly you have to change around everything in your notes to make that secret room fit in between these spaces that you didn't leave or find somewhere else to put it. Essentially mapping every last little bit out. The only real benefit is that it allows people to feel clever in spotting those secret little tidbits, but the downside to that is, of course, would their characters really have that eidetic memory of exactly what they've seen, and not only that, be able to break out the slide rule to measure each room down to the feet? It's probably less likely. And if they were the intelligent Sherlock Holmes-esque kind of character, then you can represent that with dice instead of having to represent it with your map. So only use the map when you have to. If you don't need a map, then use theater of the mind, use descriptions, provide a recap that provides the options of where they can go. You can keep track on your personal map, which you definitely need to have a copy of, and they don't necessarily need it unless things are happening in sudden bullet time, or you need to represent distances, or you want to convey information in a way that you can't do verbally. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but as I think everybody who has complained about the line art maps in recent years for 5th edition products can attest, some pictures are just better than others. That said, those line art pictures are a great representation of what a lot of battle maps are going to look like in person, because we're going to draw them out by hand. And that's definitely okay. It's just us snobby people with access to other options and the amazing creative talents that are out there that want to do something different. If you, when you are participating in dungeon situations and people are going to be moving about, if you have got a map out in front of your players, then try to use as few miniatures as possible to represent the action that's going on between those situations where you might need to have every hand on deck because a combat is broken out or something time sensitive is happening in multiple locations. If you have a simple token that you can use as a location marker to show where the whole group is, then you again draw attention away from the map a little, bring it to the narration, and you only have to move one token around in order to represent where everything is. That's a great way to manage your map a little bit better. You can also teach your players how to map a dungeon based on the descriptives in a way that doesn't require them to break out a slide rule and figure out every single direction. It doesn't even require them to use gridded paper and match everything to 5-foot squares or the like, especially when you're going to run into dungeons that are designed not to work that way. But instead, teach your players that all they really need to do is create a box for any room that they go into and put 2 words in it that describe the room in a manner that they can remember, and draw lines that run in between the different rooms, branching when it goes between different ones, and that would be enough for somebody scribbling a note down for themselves to be able to find their way out of almost any kind of maze-like dungeon, no matter what. It's the kind of thing that the adventurer would probably have, and so it actually brings them out of the fiction less for them to map in that manner than for them to hurriedly race through and yet somehow have a perfect recall and then get frustrated at the tiny little differences that a bunch of diagonals by a evil cartographer has put in their way. Those are just a couple of things to help. I hope that that's useful. Definitely try to stretch people's willingness to use theater of the mind and break out the map only when you absolutely have to. There's so much that we gain from imagining battles through the eyes of our characters, and though it is a skill that is harder for some people than others, it is not a skill that can't be learned, and it's not a skill that will be learned without some repetition. So don't be afraid to fight the good fight on that. When it comes to what you're going to actually use physically at the table, I have some strong preferences. I spent most of my DMing career with a Chessex battle map, which I'm a huge fan of. It's just a simple dry erase or wet erase roll-up mat that's durable and tough and just goes the distance, and all it does is provide you with enough space to draw out whatever you need to, get a couple of different colors, and manage yourself on that. The more you can have pre-drawn and you can roll out in order to give people access, the better, but be aware that those kinds of markers do tend to stain if you leave them on there for too long, so sometimes it's better to just give a hasty little drawing to give context or finish things out. The pro side to the Chessex battle map is its unlimited versatility, and of course the downside is that things will mark and stay, and it's just a flat, featureless plane with no details, which is also kind of its pro. You can print out paper maps, which I've done before, sometimes going down to like a printing store in order to get large poster map style sort of things that have got the maps out there. I have a rolled up sailing vessel somewhere that was printed out for me at one point at a reasonable expense. The downsides obviously to this is it costs you money. The upsides is you have the exact map that you need when you want to slap it down for those special situations, and you don't have to draw on the spot, which means you don't have to waste time doing that while trying to keep up narration and walk and chew gum all at the same time. You can go to the 3D printed route. I used True Tiles by Heroes Forge and was a huge fan of those, though of course there's all the other ones that are out there, Dwarven Forge and a bunch of different 3D printed, kickstarted and or just free files that you can use. Obviously it takes a little bit of practice to get decent enough at creating things with your 3D printer, and not only that, but costs a fair bit in order to churn through the filament. There was a year where I think I spent something like $5,000 on filament because I was a little obsessed and had kind of a side business thing that I was working on. But Suffice to say, that can add up reasonably quickly. And of course, once you go down the rabbit hole of creating that perfect scene that represents the exact situation with 3D printed terrain, it can be really hard to then say, but there's this in there and that in there, without just going on to something like Thingiverse and trying to find a file and print it out. And being prepared for your upcoming week can be a royal hassle, and it can sort of lead you towards the railroad mentality of wanting to make sure that you use this thing that you spent so much time printing and painting and preparing. If you're into that kind of thing, you have the time and you enjoy it, you will have a blast doing it, and your players will enjoy it. So don't think of this as being a super no, but you have to be careful about how far down the rabbit hole you go. I've attempted a digital table before, where we turned a TV and hooked it up to a computer and ran we actually ran Foundry Virtual Tabletop for our personal table at home with this monstrosity that we had built. I'm actually not a big fan of the digital table. One issue that always bugged the tar out of me was the little distance that the glass put you between the display and the character token on top, and what a difference that made when you were looking at your token from different angles or different distances, and it made figuring out exactly where those lines were a little bit obnoxious, and it tended to be not as versatile a tool as just running a virtual tabletop. Obviously, the pros are that you can use all of the gorgeous art that's out there on the internet and all these marvelous map creators that are creating things that are just super sweet and exciting to place out on that digital tabletop. Cons of expense, size, and the inability to easily put that sucker away, and that annoying gap that drove me nuts. I've used a digital display mounted on a wall and showing the map from there. It's actually how we're currently running games for my in-person group, and I'm not really sold on that being a perfect solution either. It does mean that you can quickly set things up for yourself, and if you've already got a TV on the wall, then you've already got your monitor to stream up the view from Foundry Virtual Tabletops. You can use the tokens that are on there, and you can either move everything yourself or have everybody staring at their own little devices, but it definitely produces a different feel than that which you get by sitting around a table with the action in front of you, and how much of the like electronic dice that you lean into or don't lean into can also really change the feel around the table. Those are the types of maps that at a quick thought I remember using, though it's been 2.5 decades, and I'm sure I've tried some different things as well. I used to use an awful lot of cutout cardboard in order to represent pretty much everything on my battle maps on top of the good old Chessex. My best suggestion for the best battle maps that are going to provide the most value to your players and be the most fun for you is unfortunately going to be an annoying answer, because the answer is a mix. The Chessex battle map is, in my opinion, for an in-person game, irreplaceably good as the most awesome thing and most versatile tool to have on hand, and I would never be truly comfortable in a game that wasn't doing everything virtually without a Chessex battle map. On top of that, however, you can add a ton of additional value to your table if you're interested in starting up on some 3D printed terrain or in some purchased terrain if you're flush to be able to buy Dwarven Forge. Those kinds of things really add a lot to the table, and if you're using a Chessex battle map and using same size grid based creations on your 3D printer, you can Add those sporadically and carefully to the situation to just build it up a touch here or there and draw your players' attention and build that excitement factor that having a set-piece battle really does. Likewise, a solid use of theater of the mind to avoid battle maps entirely is a big deal, and then having some printed out maps for smaller locations where it's feasible, or if you're able to go to a Kinko's or whatever they call them nowadays and print out a larger map, then an occasional use of that so that it doesn't get too outrageous on your wallet is probably not a bad call. With a Chessex battle map and a handful of 3D printed elements, I feel comfortable running an in-person game that I think can take things to the next level for a group of players without being outrageous. Because you're talking about running things in a dungeon, just make sure that you're separating and utilizing theater of the mind as much as possible, and then use individual rooms that the players are in when there's action happening, drawing out only as much as you have to, and that keeps the flow of play going and avoids the messy problem of running one room into another. Teach your players how to use their own mapping skills in order to keep track of things, and utilize as few miniatures on the table as you can for as few maps as you can get away with on the table also. Once you master those couple of steps, things get pretty easy to run maps in person. I hope that helps. Thanks so much for the question, Matt Laser, and for your support in the community. And if anybody has anything they'd like to add on what they do to run awesome maps, please share so that we can grow better at Dungeons & Dragons together.